We're ready. All right. Welcome everyone to the January 16th, 2024 meeting of Troy City Council. We ask that if you have any cell phones, please put them on vibrate or turn them off. And I'm William Roselle, the President of the Council, and tonight's invocation and leading and pledge is Miss Christy Marshall. Please stand.
Dear Lord, we ask that you guide us to work together as a team to have a productive meeting, enabling us to achieve great results. I also ask that you watch over our first responders and our military to keep them safe. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Westfall. Mrs. Marshall.
Here.
Mr. Whidden.
Here.
Mr. Twist.
Here.
Mrs. Snee.
Here.
Mr. Sievert.
Present.
Mr. Schilling.
Present.
Mr. Phillips.
Here.
Mr. Pierce.
Here.
Move to excuse Mrs. Westphal.
Second.
Please call the roll on that, Mrs. Knight.
Mrs. Marshall.
Yes.
Mr. Whidden.
Yes.
Mr. Twist.
Yes.
Mrs. Snee.
Yes.
Mr. Sievert.
Yes.
Mr. Schilling.
Yes.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes.
Mr. Pierce.
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall is excused.
Very good. Mrs. Knight, could you please read the summary of the January 2nd, 2024 minutes?
Minutes of Council, January 2, 2024. Ordinance number 01-2024, employing Clerk of Council, was given first title reading and was adopted. Mr. Phillips was elected President Pro Tem of Council. Mrs. Snee was elected Clerk of Council Pro Tem. There were no committee reports. Resolution number R-64-2023, Memorandum of Understanding with Troy Schools, was given third reading and adopted. Resolution number R-71-2023, Professional Services Agreement, Mannix and Smith, regarding the abandoned gas station property at 100 West Market Street, second reading and adopted. Resolution number R-1-2024, authorizing sale of property declared surplus by internet auction during the year, was given first reading and was adopted. Following various comments, Council adjourned at 7:23 p.m.
Motion to approve the minutes. Second.
Motion made to approve the minutes by Mr. Phillips, seconded by Mr. Schilling. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Whidden.
Yes.
Mr. Twist.
Yes.
Mrs. Snee.
Yes.
Mr. Sievert.
Yes.
Mr. Schilling.
Yes.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes.
Mr. Pierce.
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall.
Yes.
Minutes are approved.
Thank you very much. We have 5 committee reports tonight, I believe. We'll start off with Building and Utilities Committee, Mr. Pierce.
Thank you. This committee met January 8th to consider the authorization for the advertising for proposals for a construction management at risk, pre-construction and construction service agreement for the design of valve replacement project at the water treatment plant. It is the recommendation of the committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to advertise for proposals from qualified entities and enter a professional service agreement for a construction management at risk, pre-construction and construction service agreement for the valve replacement project at a cost not to exceed $250,000. Respectfully submitted by Councilman Phillips, Councilwoman Snee, and myself as Chair, Samuel Pierce.
Anyone have any questions or comments on that? All right, we move to Finance, and Mr. Sievert.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have 2 reports. The first one will be the release of the mortgage liens for Kendra Baker Fox at 115 East Water Street. This committee met January 8th to consider the release of all mortgage liens associated with the loan from the Exterior Home Repair Program for the property at 115 East Water Street. As the loan has been paid in full, the loan program was established in 2000 for properties in the city's historic district. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to release all mortgage liens associated with the loan from the exterior home repair program for the property of 115 East Water Street. The committee supports emergency legislation so that the mortgage liens can be released without delay. Respectfully submitted, Mr. Schilling, Mrs. Westfall, and myself as chairman of the Finance Committee. The second report deals with the deferment of small business development loan and community development block grant loan payments. The committee met January 8th to consider allowing 3 months deferral on loan payments of principal and interest with no compounded penalties from February through April of 2024 to the 18 small business development and community development block grant loans issued in the Downtown Historic District. Based on the borrower's approval, committee member Westfall abstained from the discussion and recommendation due to a conflict of interest. It is the recommendation of the committee members Schilling and Siebert that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to implement 3 months deferral of loan payments of principal and interest with no compounded penalties to commence on February 1, 2024 and end on April 30th, 2024 to the 18 active business loan agreements located within the historic district based upon the borrower's approval. So that the deferred loan payments can be implemented by February 1, emergency legislation is supported. Respectfully submitted, Mr. Schilling, myself as chairman of the Finance Committee, and Mrs. Westfall abstained from participating in that committee.
Any questions on either one of those reports from council? Law and Ordinance, Mr. Whidden.
We have 2 reports tonight. Committee members Marshall and Whidden met on January 8th to consider an amendment to the Troy Codified Ordinance Section 521.07, fences to comply with the 2024 edition of the International Property Maintenance Code, to include an exemption that private swimming pools with certain power safety covers do not have to be enclosed by a fence. Committee members did not support including this exemption in the city ordinances. It is the recommendation of this committee that the recommendation of staff not be supported and that Section 521.07 of the Code of Ordinances not to be amended to include the wording of the IPMC. This is respectfully submitted by Mrs. Marshall, Mr. Twist, and myself as chair. Additionally, the committee members Marshall and Whidden met on January 8th to consider recommending regarding adopting the 2024 edition of the International Property Maintenance Code, IPMC. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared adopting the 2024 edition of the International Property Maintenance Code, including changes recommended by staff, amending Section 1307.99 of the Codified Ordinances, penalty, and enacting new Section 521.98, appeals. This is respectfully submitted by Mrs. Marshall, Mr. Twist, and myself as chair.
Any questions on either one of those reports? Recreation and Parks, and Mr. Whidden is going to sit in for Mrs. Westfall tonight.
Thank you, Mr. President. This committee met on January 8th to consider bidding the concession operations at Paul G. Duke Park as requested by the Recreation Board. The current agreement expires at year's end. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Recreation Board of the City of Troy, Ohio, to advertise for bids and enter into a contract with concession operations at the softball fields and the football fields at Paul G. Duke Park. This is respectfully submitted by Mrs. Marshall, myself, and Mrs. Westfall as chair.
Any questions on that? I believe we have an oral committee report. Mrs. Snee?
Yes. At the request of the mayor, I would move that five current members of the Community Improvement Corporation be reappointed. They are Bradley Bixler, Joseph Graves, Gary Fisher, Edward Westmeyer, and Kathy Vukovich. Their term would commence immediately and expire December 31st, 2024.
I'll second that.
Have any questions? I have a question. Mayor, those 5, did we have any other input from citizens that expressed nobody expressed to be on CIC?
No.
Okay.
I have a question.
Jeff?
Madam Mayor, did the 5 that are being reappointed to the board, did they resubmit their application to do that, or
Not a
you,
requirement.
you don't require that? Okay, so they just, you contacted them and they said, yeah, we'd like to
The
continue it?
process is we reach out to them to ask if they are interested in reappointment, and if they are, then we don't go any farther with it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay. We have first and second roll call on the motion for CIC reappointments.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Whitten?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Mr. President, I have a second
Yes, ma'am.
motion
Go
to
ahead.
make. At the request of the mayor, I would move that the following two members of the Human Relations Commission be reappointed. They are Marvin Major and Todd Sievert, and their term would commence immediately and expire on December 31st, 2026.
I'll second that also.
And I would assume the same procedure followed with that. First and second, any other questions? Could you please call the roll, Mrs. Knight?
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Whitten?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Right. We've come to the citizens' comments. On it, you can come 2-minute time limit at this section on any items that are on the agenda. Anybody would like to come forward and speak on any of our items tonight? We have 3 resolutions and 2 ordinances. Seeing none, we will move on to our resolutions. Mrs. Knight, could you read Resolution 2, R2, 2024?
Resolution number R2, 2024, resolution authorizing the Recreation Board of the City of Troy, Ohio to advertise for bids and enter into contracts for the operation of concessions at the Paul G. Duke Park softball fields and the Paul G. Duke Little League football field. This is the first reading. This has been recommended by the Recreation Board.
Move to suspend.
Second. Move to suspend the 3-reading rule by Mr. Pierce, seconded by Mr. Schilling. Mrs. Knight, would please call the roll.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Whitten?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Move to adopt. Second.
Motion's been moved to adopt by Mr. Twist, seconded by Mr. Sievert. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Whitten?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, could you please read Resolution 3, 2024?
Resolution number R3, 2024, resolution deferring loan payments related to the City of Troy, Ohio Community Development Block Grant and Small Business Development Loans made to properties of the Downtown Historic District and declaring an emergency. The deferral will be for a 3-month period only. This is the first reading.
Move to suspend.
Second.
3-reading rules, motion to suspend by Mr. Sievert, seconded by Mr. Pierce. Mrs. Knight, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Whitten?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Move to adopt. Second.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Twist, seconded by Mr. Sievert. Mrs. Knight, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Whitten?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
The resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, could you please read Resolution R4, 2024?
Resolution number R4, 2024, resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to advertise for proposals and enter into a construction management at risk pre-construction and construction services agreement for the design of the water treatment plant valve replacement project, cost not to exceed $250,000, first reading.
Motion to suspend the rules.
Second. Motion to suspend the rules by Mr. Whidden, seconded by Mr. Twist. Mrs. Knight, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Motion to adopt the resolution by Mr. Twist, seconded by Mr. Whidden. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
That takes us to our ordinances. Mrs. Knight, could you read ordinance 02-2024, please?
Ordinance number 02-2024, ordinance releasing mortgage lien for Kendra Baker Fox and declaring an emergency. This mortgage is being released as the loan has been paid in full. First reading.
Move to suspend.
Second.
Motion to suspend the three readings by Mr. Sievert, seconded by Mr. Twist. Mrs. Knight, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Motion to adopt the ordinance is by Mr. Twist, seconded by Mr. Pierce. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Ordinance is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, could you please read our final ordinance tonight, 03-2024?
Ordinance number 03-2024, ordinance repealing Chapter 1307 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Troy, Ohio, and enacting new Chapter 1307 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Troy, Ohio, regarding the International Property Maintenance Code, and enacting new Section 521.98 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Troy, Ohio. This is the first reading.
Move to suspend.
Second.
Motion to suspend the readings by Mr. Phillips, seconded by Mrs. Snee. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes. Move to adopt.
Second.
Motion to approve by Mrs. Snee, seconded by Mr. Phillips. Do we have any questions?
Yes. This is not the ordinance that the committee discussed that was not in favor of, right? This is, that one has not been brought before council yet, right?
This is the new version of the IPMC. The fence code will remain the same. You're not changing anything out of it, so it takes precedent, and that other section that conflicts with it was struck from the ordinance that you are passing tonight.
Okay, so we're going to require fences around all swimming pools regardless. Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate the clarification on that.
All right, Mrs. Knight, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Ordinance is adopted.
Thank you very much. Brings us to communications. Mrs. Knight, is there any?
No, sir.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, do you have any comments tonight?
I do not, thank you very much.
Mr. Titterton, Director of Public Safety and Service.
Nothing this evening, thank you.
Mr. Carver.
Well, somebody has to say something.
Go to it.
It's cold. That's all I have.
Turn up
All
the
right.
heat, yeah, turn up the
Our
heat.
auditor's not here. Mayor, I don't mean to nitpick on this. You're saying some of our groups, my question to you, is some of our groups have to do the application and some do not?
Nobody has to do applications. There is no application requirement.
Okay.
Is that for all boards or just that particular board?
Any board. We have an application process for residents to let me know that they're interested, but
Okay, so I guess my further questions, that would, then when do we go through that like, we'll take CIC for example, okay? If nobody did it, but let's say we have 10. So you've gone through applications to see who is interested in CIC?
No. I take the people who are on the board and ask them if they are interested in reappointment.
Okay, so let's say one of those was not interested. I'm done, I'm moving out of town or whatever. Then what do you do?
I either talk to somebody I know, I go through the applications.
That's what I'm asking. Is that when we go through the applications?
Go through
Okay.
it. But turning in an application does not mean
No.
that that's where we choose.
No, but because the application's got multiple things they're interested in, correct?
Yeah.
I'm just asking what the procedure was. Okay.
Sure.
That's all I have. Council have any questions?
No.
That leads us to, we have public, yes, public comment? Or we have a presentation first? We're having a presentation tonight by Mary Lynn
Loader.
Loader. Okay.
Yes.
I would have blown that one. She is the general manager of Miami County Conservancy District. I think a few of us will have to move, and then you can turn the light back on.
Okay, great. Well, and thank you while that's popping up. It's always nice to be in Troy, Ohio. I went to college in Troy, New York, and it's a big difference between Troy, Ohio, and Troy, New York, and this is definitely...
They have more snow.
I actually have more snow here than down in southwest Ohio. I live in Loveland, and it's nice to see the snow kind of on the sidewalks and stuff, but not on the sidewalks, on the side of the sidewalks, I suppose. Let's see, is this turning on? Okay, great. Excellent. Let's see. What happened there? All right. See if this mouse can show me where I am here. Sorry, my eyes are not quite that good right now. Okay. All right, so again, thank you for letting me come. I'm going to kind of cover a little bit of an update just on the Miami Conservancy District. I'm sure you're all somewhat familiar with the Conservancy District. I've been at the district now for about 18 months, and it's an amazing organization who has an amazing mission, but over the last several decades, I think we've been a little bit quiet, not really talking a lot about some of our needs, and that is not my nature. It's really important to me that we take care of infrastructure and ensure that we're able to continue to have sustainable, thriving communities that are protected from floodwaters, and that is one of our most important missions that we do at the Miami Conservancy District. So I'm going to talk through a little bit of what we do. Again, our mission is a threefold of protection, preservation, and promotion, utilizing both, the primary mission of flood control is top of mind, but because we have a tremendous flood protection system, one that is unparalleled across the country, I must say, because of the forethought and the innovative engineering that was put in place over 100 years ago. It just doesn't happen that way anymore, and it would be almost nearly impossible to do what was done 100 years ago. And then just 50 years ago, the first mile of trail was built on top of our levee system, and then since then has now created over 99 miles of trails along the Great Miami River. And those trails are wonderful because it allows people to come into towns, communities like Troy and Piqua and Hamilton and Dayton and see what a beautiful resource we have in the Great Miami River and the thriving communities all up and down it. And I was really excited to, when I think I went to a county commissioner meeting, and that's when I learned the first time, early as I'm here at the Conservancy District, that it all started here in Troy. And so I was excited to hear that, and then also had the opportunity, and Mrs. Knight was actually there, I guess, helped to sign, so get some of the documents signed 50 years ago, when the first mile of the trail. She right? You were here.
I was.
Not to date you in any way, of course, but...
Sixth grade co-op.
But it's a tremendous honor that Troy has of that distinction of the first mile starting right here. And again, only because we had a flood protection system can we then do stuff like that. And I try to just really emphasize that with the communities I'm talking with because, you know, we have our Riverway program, we promote the Riverway and everything that's going on, but if our flood protection system fails, none of that stuff is going to matter. So it's really important for me that we really talk about the flood protection system and that I try to help people understand what we're doing and what we need to do so that we can continue to ensure that unparalleled protection. So again, we try to work with leadership within the communities. We've tried to provide leadership. We've worked with communities specifically for, you know, recognizing the fact that water is very strong. Water is going to go where it wants to go, and we can't try to control it. We can only work with it, and that's the way that we're going to be successful. And that's the benefit also of the system we have. So our main district, we have 3 different districts as part of the Miami Conservancy District. The primary mission we have is our flood protection system. I'm going to talk a lot about that tonight. But I also want to emphasize the fact that we have 2 other districts, our recreation district and then water stewardship. The funding for each one of those are completely different. And today, again, I just want to primarily talk about the flood protection because that's the one that we really need to address some outstanding issues. We're kind of, I'll just cut to the chase right now. We've got, we have not had any revenue increase since 2012. Our revenue was flat from 2012 to 2022. And we had also a capital assessment that was expired in 2022. So we don't have any ongoing incoming capital dollars to make the repairs and rehabilitations that we need to. And we're also governed by a conservancy court, so we have 9 judges that make up the conservancy court. We have 1 judge from every one of the 9 counties that makes up the conservancy district, and that is the governance model that we have. And then the judges appoint 3 members of the board of directors, and that's where I'm responsible to the board of directors. And then we have a staff of almost about 50 people who maintain the flood protection system or work on the recreation or water stewardship district. I'm going to do my best of narrating this 90-minute video, or 90-second video. Hopefully if I'm narrating it's not 90 minutes. But I'm going to, it's just a quick something that we put together. So since the 1913 flood, our community, you know, had devastating floodwaters. I thought maybe I was hearing something. And as a result, we built the 5 large dry dams as well as these storage basins upstream of the dams, and those really provide unparalleled support for communities. For 100 years, we've been able to do this. Other communities face a lot of flooding, but that's something we don't have to worry about because of the assets, the 55 miles of levees, 5 large dry dams, and 35,000 acres of flood storage basins that we control the flood rates on. You know, there's dam failures that happen, and we don't want that to happen to us. We're not immune to it. We do our best to take care of the system, but like I said, we have more needs than we have resources right now. So we are doing different investigations, looking at concrete deterioration, what needs to be replaced, what the risks are of those, trying to prioritize some of the highest risks. And again, with the creation of the Miami Conservancy District, it was very strongly supported by the communities as well as the business communities. There was over $2 million worth, oh, it's going to start all over again. $2 million was raised in 1913, 4 months after the Great Flood. $2 million then was raised. And, you know, again, because of the strong support of the business community, because they saw the value of that. And I think as I talk with Chamber of Commerce's or Rotaries, and, you know, I've been doing this circuit to try to, you know, see what people know, but also help inform folks of some of our needs. And the business community is very supportive of some of the things that we need to do. In Troy, we currently have about $474 million worth of property that is protected by the Conservancy District. These are all pictures from 1913 from the from the devastation here in Troy, and it's not something, if we were to have a dam failure, you know, we would have inundation in those same areas again, if Lockington Dam was to fail, which we've actually recently made some flood wall improvements to Lockington, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But again, I just want to emphasize that, you know, we are not immune to failure. There have been the Michigan dam failure that was showed in that video, that was determined to be preventable. We have issues that we know we need to do. If we don't fix those and something happens, that's the same situation. We knew it. It was preventable, and we don't want to be in that situation because it always is going to cost more money to clean up from a disaster and then put that money into repairs and prevention. There's, you know, so that was back in 2020 in Michigan. Then there's other situations that happened with Hurricane Harvey, not unlike what we have in our storage basins. Upstream of the 5 dry dams, we have flooding rights on about 35,000 acres, and we have a property administrator who regularly looks at and works with, you know, planning departments or realtors on, you know, when property is changing hands to ensure that those property owners who own that 35,000 acres, they know that we own the flooding rights on that. We purchased the flooding rights to flood those properties back between 1914 and 1922, so that these dams could actually, you know, behind them kind of swell up and store that water. So in Texas, though, after Hurricane Harvey, the Corps of Engineers operates those dams, and essentially they modified the operation, and those upstream basins were flooded, and the Corps then had to pay over $1 billion of settlements. I think it was like $2 billion worth of settlements. So I just make that point because it's costly if we just, you know, kind of ignore those issues. So our flood protection system is an integrated flood protection system. It all works together. We have 5 large dry dams, and that's the areas in the green there. Then we also have 55 miles of these green areas here. Those are the dams. So Troy has 1 dam upstream of it. It's Lockington Dam. And then the areas in red is where we have levees all along, primarily the cities. We have in total about 55 miles of levees and flood walls. And then within the levees, we have floodgates. And those floodgates we operate during wet weather or high water to keep that water from backing up into the communities. We also have about 1,100 acres of floodplain, and then, like I said, the 35,000 acres of storage basins, and then improved channels in some areas of the cities. So here again is where those, these are each of the 5 dry dams. We have the areas mapped of where we purchased flooding easements and whatnot, and essentially in the official plan of the Miami Conservancy District that was established which is established under state law. There's 6101 of the Ohio Revised Code is where Conservancy District gets its authority, and in the official plan it specifically says, you know, the channel of the Great Miami River will convey half of the flow of if we had a 1913 flood again, and then the other half is in those storage basins. So that's why it's so critical that we maintain that. We're also fortunate because not only was it designed to the 1913 flood, but it was designed with a 40% factor of safety. So again, these things don't get constructed like this anymore. We're very fortunate to have this very conservatively built system, particularly given the increased precipitation that we've dealt with over the last several decades. This is just an inundation map. As part of our work, we also do emergency action plans and operation and maintenance manuals and stuff, but this is something that came from our emergency action plan. If we were to have a failure, for example, at Lockington Dam, and if it was at full capacity, this is where we would see floodwaters in Troy. In some areas where it's purple would be anywhere between 8 and 20 feet, and where it's blue or green, you know, 2 or 4 feet in those areas. So these are did you have a question?
Yes, I did. This is just flooding, though, from the primary channel that you're talking about to feed into this. This does not take into consideration inflow from fields that are outside of the collection areas of these things, is that correct?
This is from a failure of Lockington Dam, which is up in
Just the
Shelby.
system itself?
Yep,
Got
if that dam were to fail, and if it were to be full, then this is what would be coming down. Actually, I can't see it right here. I think it says how many hours would that flow be down? I think it's 3? Yeah. And again, this is a major high water event and a failure. It's the likelihood of it happening is low, but the consequence is high. And that's how we need to look at things for rehabbing.
Got it.
Do you have a question over there? Did you? Okay, sorry.
I showed Bill where his house was flooded.
Okay, yeah, right. And, again, because we have the system we have, entities don't have to have flood insurance. And I've got some stats a little bit later, but I think that just nationally, the annual cost average for flood insurance is about $900 a year. And again, you're paying for damage, not necessarily protection. And so we have made investments over the last 20 years into our system to reduce the risk of failure. These are specific pictures from Lockington Dam, where we have removed a lot of the old deteriorated concrete. You can see a lot of the wall is exposed here, and then we put new monoliths in some areas, or all new concrete. We've also put new relief wells so that we're pumping the under seepage of water, which is a risk of dams along the dams, as well as some of the flood walls. And that in total was about $24.5 million that we've completed that. And this Lockington project is still ongoing on the left wall, but soon to be wrapping up. And more is needed. And levees are also a risk of failure. In fact, we have a board of consultants. Since the creation of the Conservancy District, we've relied on international dam and levee experts to kind of advise us on key issues or concerns that we have. And we just brought them to Dayton back last April, and they see that, our dam safety initiative, that was the last capital assessment that we have, and that expired in 2022. That didn't provide any money for us to do any work on levees. And levees, they believe, is one of the higher risks of potential failure because, again, we have a lot of water that's hitting those levees a lot, from the river. And we have a lot of pipes in them. We have a lot of utilities are in them. And when I say we, it's the collective we. Troy uses our levees for storm sewer outfalls and all kinds of good stuff. But they are not, getting better on their own. These are some pictures of some of our storm outfalls or other conduits that we have in the levee system. And these are, cracks and poor conditions, conduits that could cause a potential levee failure. So we're in the process of trying to identify and characterize a lot of these and then make investments, but we don't have the money to do that kind of work. And I'm kind of gearing up to share with you some of what our plans for the future. We also, this is our Germantown Dam, and this is south of Troy, but it does, it's our most southern dam, and in March of last year, we lost part of the wall of the dam. This is the upstream wall, and so we actually have prioritized some urgent repairs that need to be done at at all three of Germantown, Englewood, and Taylorsville. And what we're doing, in total though, we have about $140 million worth of needs. Now all of this stuff doesn't need to be done immediately, and that's again where our Board of Consultants is advising us to do more of a measured approach to risk prioritization and make sure that we're spending the right money on the right projects at the right time, and that's what we're in the process of doing right now. So we have put together 2 different priorities for PDAC, and thank you very much to Troy for helping us and supporting us on that. We do have 2 priorities that were named as priorities, regional priorities, and that is those upstream walls at Germantown, Englewood, and Lockington, and then about $10 million worth of levee stability improvements. We are currently targeting the state capital bill at about $10 million for those dam wall improvements, dam wall improvements. And then also FEMA has a high hazard dam grant that they are anticipating giving, I think, $30-some million to the state of Ohio ODNR, and we will be trying to get some of that money to make some of these improvements too. We're also trying to target, because historically the Conservancy District has not gone after state and federal dollars. It has been a very proud organization that it was locally funded, and, you know, for the last, since the beginning of time, they have not wanted to collect money from state and federal. But with all of the money that's out there now, and the fact that now if we were to try to make, you know, create the flood protection system now, we would work with the Army Corps of Engineers. There's certain thresholds and funding available if you want to build a system. Well, the Conservancy District and all of the communities got together and built the system with local dollars. So Congressman Turner is very interested in helping us get an authorization under the Water Resources Development Act, which could give us special authority to kind of reimburse us for the work and the original investment that we made, and use those dollars for some of the rehabilitation that we need to do. And it's very unique. It isn't done often because the Corps of Engineers was not around when we were building our system and needed to build our system. And it was probably in like the 1930s, that they started doing that. And so we're really a unique, the Corps of Engineers calls us a unicorn because, you know, there's not many like us, so it could be an opportunity for us to bring in some federal dollars through the Water Resources Development Act, but it's like a 3 or 4 year process to get through. So, you know, I just want people to know that we're trying to get those dollars, and our board now recognizes the need for it, because like the dollars I was talking about, $140 million, would be very, very, you know, much more expensive for our locals to be able to cover that. But we can't rely on it completely. So I wanted to kind of share all that with you, and then kind of dive in with how are we funded and what are we currently doing to make up our current shortfall or the deficit that we have, because we are 3 years behind getting a readjustment of our benefits. So I mentioned we have a Conservancy Court, and in 2020, the Conservancy Court authorized us to proceed with a readjustment of benefits. The way that we are funded is based on on property lines and boundaries that were flooded in 1913 are now protected by the Conservancy District. So essentially, the 1913 flood was determined to be the design storm for the system that we have. And so back in 1913, there were hundreds of surveyors that were set out and took all kinds of detailed records of how much flooding was, you know, at this spot, at this spot, at that spot, so that we have all of those records, and that has been used for over 100 years, and to determine what the assessment is, what the benefit is for that property, and then what the assessment is to be able to recover the cost to be able to maintain the system. By state law, we're not allowed to do this readjustment any more frequently than every 6 years. So right now, the assessments that we're collecting are based on 2012 property conditions and property values. So for example, Kettering Hospital was not located in Troy along the river. They are now, but they're currently paying a flood protection assessment as if they were not really there. So because a critical point of our flood protection assessment is what is the property value, again, that's coming from the county auditors, and then it's how deep was the flooding, how tall is the building, and it's a very fair and equitable way to allocate costs or benefits of the flood protection system. So everybody doesn't pay the same, it's the same methodology, but you really pay based on how much are you protected, and what is being protected determines the assessment rate. And so that's for individual property owners. Then local governments, 5 counties and 21 communities currently pay a unit assessment. That unit assessment is based off of the individual assessment, because those properties that they're providing utilities or emergency services or, roadways to and whatnot, those areas of town are also protected, and that's how unit assessments are determined. So I'll go through, just again, this idea of the readjustment of benefits. As I said, readjustments are ordered by the court when it's determined that there's a material change in value or condition, so they determined that in 2020. It was delayed by 3 years because of Butler County was appealing their property tax value. And because our equation is based on the property tax value, we could not proceed with that because it was potentially going to change. So now that appeal was resolved in September of '23, and so now we're able to proceed and are moving forward that. So the whole point is that it ensures more of a fair and equitable process, so allocation of the cost, rather. So these are all images of just properties that were not included in the 2012 readjustment because they were different. There wasn't, Markham Apartments in Hamilton, there wasn't Kettering Hospital, there wasn't CareSource, so they're all in this readjustment going to get an updated assessment. The process is outlined here. We are bringing together we have a board of appraisers that, again, has been established. That's established in state law, and we've had a board of appraisers since the beginning of the Conservancy District that determines and develops the methodology, and then we use that methodology in the calculation. We're anticipating public noticing this on March 1st, and there will be an appeal process for property owners to submit an exception if they feel like something is not right. Then that is a process that we have as well. And then the Conservancy Court ultimately needs to review and approve a rate for us to proceed on in July. And then assessments would be collected in 2025. So I have some preliminary findings for you in terms of what this readjustment is going to result in, as well as the fact that we've been 3 years behind and having to dip into our cash reserves to be able to maintain the system. So here's 3 different levels of impacts. And first thing I want to point out, if I can find my mouse here, is the map that's on the left-hand side. And so the areas that are in blue are areas that are just protected by our dams. The areas that are in peach are protected by levees within that kind of localized area. And so a levee provides a higher level of protection, whereas if you don't have a levee, you're just protected by the dam, we consider that partial protection. So these first 2 examples are based on a property that is protected by the levee, and if the property value is $100,000. We're looking at a maintenance assessment rate of 2.78 and a potential capital assessment of 1%. So on the first example, a levee-protected property that had at least, say, 10 foot of floodwater in 1913, so we have our assets now that are protecting from a lot more water than anywhere else. They're going to get the highest level of flood factor in the calculation. So for their maintenance assessment, that property is looking at an increase of about $62 a year. And then on a capital assessment, we don't have a capital assessment right now, that would be about $105 a year. Overall, about $33 a month. If a property is also fully protected by the levee, but the flood depth was not as significant, so it's kind of further away from the river potentially, or it's a little bit higher ground, their flood factor is going to be a 6% as opposed to the 30%. And that property would be looking at about a $12 increase for maintenance and $22 a year for capital, for a total $7 a month for flood protection. For a property that is within the blue area or just partially protected by dams, it's about a $7 increase for maintenance and a $10 $10 a year increase for capital, about $3 a month. So those are the three different examples. In terms of how this all falls, if we look at all of our 42,000 properties that are assessed a flood protection benefit, the breakdown is, most of them in Montgomery and Butler, in Miami is about 10%. About 88% of the properties that pay a flood protection system, flood protection assessment with maintenance and capital would, 88% of them would be under $340 a year, or $33 a month. Now, there are some that are higher, and but again, they either have higher property value or they're have a maximum protection. On the unit benefits, before I go on, does anybody have any questions on this? Yes, Mayor.
Does this already show up on people's bills?
Yes.
Patrick's saying no.
Well, so
The current rate is already on there.
the
That shows up on their bill as MCD assessment.
tax assessment, yes,
Okay.
yes, on your tax bill, And so if you're in the flood protection system, you already have a Miami Conservancy District flood protection assessment, and if you're in that, you already have your maintenance assessment, and so for $100,000 property, it would be going up about $62 on the maintenance. If you're full protected by a levee, but minimum flood depth, increase about $12. But the capital is new. That's not what's is not on there currently.
Thank you.
Yes.
And these are just the folks that you're indicating in the pink,
Peach or the blue?
peach, whatever, and the blue area?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and so, again, as I said earlier, we have 3 different districts. Each one of them are funded differently.
Right.
And actually, I think for the water stewardship or aquifer protection subdistrict, the counties actually pay those directly, or there's 2 counties, I think Butler and maybe Warren, that puts it on the tax bills of the individuals. But generally, I believe that Miami County pays it directly from the county. So that wouldn't be Troy. And then our recreation improvement subdistrict, we maintain 35 miles of the bike trail, and where we're doing that maintenance, those communities contribute. And Miami County or Troy or Piqua maintain the bike trails, so we're not collecting any revenue from recreation here, with the exception of Riverway. Our Riverway promotion, Troy is an active member of that.
And you indicated that because everyone's going to see some type of increase, then everyone would be notified in that March 1st timeframe that you mentioned?
Yeah, so when we say everybody, it's just everybody within the flood protection area. So that sliver that's along the Great Miami River, not all of Troy and not...
Anyone who's paying this?
Correct,
Okay.
yep. So we are in the process of, we're just required to put a notice in the, paper publications and whatnot, but we are also mailing, we've already started mailing postcards to residents or businesses within the flood protection system to just let them know who we are and what we do. And now in March 1st, we'll be mailing a mailer with a QR code so that people can either type in their name, address, or parcel ID to see what the impact is on their property.
Thank you.
So that's all the individual assessments. Then I wanted to just kind of give you an overview of the unit assessments. And so the unit assessments are what Troy pays directly through its tax bill also. And so the local governments like Troy does not pay for properties that it uses for government services like this building or utilities or streets or parking lots, treatment plants. You're not paying on those. Rather, the formula is based, and again, this is the formula that has been used for the last 100 years. The formula is based on the fact that Troy has a certain number of areas of town that are protected, and the individual assessment payers are paying for their individual property, and then Troy has utilities and streets and treatment plants and emergency services that can get to those areas. And so the formula is based on the total number of individual properties that are protected, and for the enhanced economic development or value that you have from the fact that you have reduced risk of flooding. And so water supplies aren't interrupted, streets aren't interrupted, and river flooding is just not something that you have to deal with in those areas because we built the system to ensure that area remains protected. So what essentially, so that the quality of life is maintained without fear of flooding. So here's the breakdown on the projected. Again, we are still going through all of the final values from the county auditor. We just got those at the beginning of this year. So these are still preliminary estimates. And so Troy is providing right now, based on 2012 values, about $100,000 for our maintenance assessment. That's for the maintenance of the flood protection system. What we're projecting for 2023 moving forward with this, it's the 7th readjustment, is about $165,000 for maintenance. And then for a 1% assessment on capital, Troy is projecting about $60,000 for capital. So in total, about $225,000 from $100,000. And again, the way that our calculations or projections are based is that we try to set this rate so that we don't have to increase it for the next at least 8 years, because we build up enough of reserve that we're then operating in a deficit for the last 4 years before an assessment. And so that is essentially kind of the overview. I know I threw a lot at you, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Just one, I think I saw in the information that you provided that you're calculating about $11.4 million a year through 32.
Mm-hmm.
So these calculations are set for that capital to cover that amount, which is what you anticipate needing.
So the 11.5 is specifically on maintenance. That's not on capital.
That's the maintenance, okay.
Yep. And so our board actually just passed a resolution to levy a new capital assessment with a spending authority of $34.5 million. We have to now take that to the Conservancy Court. We're looking at probably about $4.5 million from that, I think, is what we'd be generating on an annual basis for capital.
Thank you.
Question. So some of the images you showed up there today with the failure of the Dam of Michigan and the spillway failure at the Warville Dam, with our dams being dry dams, what is if you were to guess, what would be the most likely cause of failure from Lockington Dam? If it were to fail, where would be the area that would be most concerning to us?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that we have addressed some of the risks with regards to the underseepage. That was a high risk identified about, say, 20 years ago. So we've installed the underseepage because there's been a lot of freeze thaw of the concrete. So that was identified as one of the highest risks. So with the underseepage wells that we put in to be able to pump out the water so that we don't have the freeze thaw, we've addressed that high risk. The second one was the deteriorated concrete. So we've addressed that on the lower parts of Lockington, but not all the way on the top of it, on both the upstream and the downstream.
So you think it would be the spillway is the most concerning part of it?
I think that it would be, a spillway could be an issue, but I think that it's a low risk that we would have an issue like that, particularly since we've invested a lot of improvements at Lockington already. But we're still kind of analyzing, like, what is the highest risk now for us to address at Lockington. But since we haven't really touched the other dams, those are probably a higher risk than what we've been able to mitigate at Lockington already.
Thank you.
Yep. I'm taking questions from the audience.
So all this money is by individual property owners and business property owners, is that correct? It's not going to go to the city, the city's not going to pay a nickel, right?
No, the cities will pay, yeah, but cities pay,
Steve, could you come up
yeah,
like normal, and so everybody knows your question?
yep.
Hi, I'm Steve Hendrickson at 975 Dickerson. My question is simple. The money is coming from property owners of either businesses or homes, right?
And cities and counties.
Okay, so the city is gonna have to pay, what, $165,000 plus $100,000?
Correct.
Okay. So the only way that people are gonna know how much they're gonna get is when the county sends out the tax bills, and there's gonna be a little item that's gonna say because you're not getting flooded, and you happen to live where people lived in 1913, that's what you're gonna have to pay, right? If you don't live where people lived in 1913.
Well, people still lived in,
Oh, I know.
those areas in 1913,
Yeah,
but it
but
wasn't
I don't.
flooded.
I don't.
Yeah, so,
So you won't be charged.
so then if you're not within the flood protection area, then you're not paying
Right.
for
So-
flood protection. You might be paying for aquifer protection, but,
Well, I got FEMA helping me with, my own flood plain, which has got nothing to do with this.
right.
So between the two of you, I mean, are you working with FEMA? Has FEMA got a separate map? Yes, they do, because I get it. My bank sends it to me.
That's right, and you
Yeah.
have to have flood insurance.
Yeah, I have to have that, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, so because we have the flood protection system, we don't have, if you're protected by the Miami Conservancy District flood system, then typically you either have significantly reduced flood insurance requirements or you don't have to have them.
Right, okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions from council members? Thank you very, very much for the
Okay.
information. Thanks for coming.
All right, thank you. You got it. Oh, I have one more thing I should have added. We are having an open house at the Hobart, I think it's the Hobart Arena, on March 14th.
Okay.
And from, I think, 3:30 to 5:30. So again, kind of have stations set up so that, we can have conversations with people about, the system, as well as be able to help people look up their assessment and stuff like that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Cover questions. Thanks. So that gets us back to comments, correct?
Yes. I do have a comment.
Huh?
Council comment.
Yep.
Mr. Pierce?
Thank you. I just wanted to thank the planners of the MLK Day for all the work that they did, and the march turned out well, and everything that happened after that as well. Thank you for your work.
Mr. Whidden? No comments?
No comment.
Looked like you had one. Anybody else? That brings us to public comments. If anybody would like to make public comments, please come up to the podium, give your name and address, give us your views, your ideas.
Good evening. Excuse me. My name's Ben Southerly, Troy Historic Preservation Alliance, 110.5 West Main Street in Troy. I'm here tonight to provide an update on the IOOF Old Miami County Courthouse Stabilization and Restoration Project. As council is aware, THPA purchased the building 3.5 weeks ago as part of a court-mediated settlement agreement. We are obligated as part of that agreement to complete stabilization work to the building by April 30th so that West Main Street can reopen in front of the building. I will be coming before you regularly between now and then to keep the channels of communication open and to answer any questions that you might have. Before I provide an update, two quick things that I think are worth mentioning. I'd like to stress that the Troy Historic Preservation Alliance, or THPA, is a 501c3 nonprofit charitable organization. We have 75 paid members who are your friends and neighbors. We advocate for the preservation, restoration, and repurposing of Troy's historic places. And we do a lot of work that doesn't have to do with the building. We hosted an educational book signing and talk on a new book about the Randolph Freed people. We sponsored Heritage Ohio's tax credit workshop, and we helped the city with its new design manual for the downtown, to name just a few of our activities. The stabilization work that we are undertaking will be completed 100% with donations and grants without any tax dollars from the city of Troy, and I believe that should meet with the council's satisfaction. The other thing I would like to mention before I give an update has to do with the building's name. The building has been called by a lot of names over the past 4 years, not all of them appropriate to state in a public meeting. One name frequently used to describe it is the Tavern Building, which was the name of a bar that was located in the building in the fairly recent past. As the new owner of the building, THPA would like to request that the City of Troy and the community adopt a new name for the building, the IOOF Building, Old Miami County Courthouse, or if you want to shorten it, simply the IOOF Building. Two of the longest lasting associations with that building and the ones of greatest historical significance are its time as a courthouse, which was from 1841 to 1888, and its time as an IOOF lodge from 1902 to 1939. So it seems to make more sense to have a name associated with the longest associations rather than just a short period when it was known as the Tavern, as a bar. Whether intended or not, calling the building the Tavern Building demeans its historical significance. The building is eligible for the National Register, and we think it's due for a little bit of respect. It's been neglected for many years, but in a few more years, I'm confident in saying that it will be restored, and it will be a point of pride in our community. Also, I chair the board of the Overfield Tavern Museum, and calling the building on West Main Street the Tavern has created some confusion and has led to questions at the museum over the past couple of years about whether the Overfield Tavern Museum is being torn down. So your support in clarifying the name would be greatly appreciated. So now for an update on the building restoration. Our focus between now and April 30th is stabilization. That means that while the building will be a hive of activity in the coming weeks and months, much of the work that is being done will be largely invisible to the public. The majority of it will be focused on the roofs of the buildings, both buildings, not all of the work, but the majority of the work. You'll see the damaged parapet that forced the closure of the sidewalk 4 years ago being repaired, and roof repairs to the courthouse portion in the back. But a lot of the work will be difficult to see. Later on, after April 30th, there will be a need to come to the city to address code violations not related to the building's structural soundness. Right off the bat, MT Studios stepped up and offered to provide in-kind support for this project, and we are very grateful for their contribution. Less than a week after purchasing the building, on December 28th, their structural engineer went through the building. We were not able to view the building prior to purchasing it, and we're relieved to see that there had not been a change in the building's condition since folks were last in the building in early June. The structural engineer has prepared preliminary plans, and we will have those, stamped engineering plans submitted no later than the deadline of January 31st. The independent examiner will then have 10 days to respond, and then we hope to get the work underway, at 10 business days, I should say. In addition to prepping the work site and taking every possible step we can so that construction crews can hit the ground running, we are in high gear in terms of fundraising. We're extremely grateful for the response that we're seeing, and we have received more than 60 pledges to date. An anonymous donor has put forth a $300,000 challenge grant, and that has generated a great response. Everyone likes to see the money go twice as far. While we will likely not know the project's exact cost for a couple more weeks, we are confident that we will raise the funds necessary to complete the project. All in all, we couldn't be happier with how the first 3.5 weeks have gone, and we continue to pray that things go smoothly and that we will have cooperative weather. Of course, one question we hear frequently is, what will the end use be? We have had considerable interest in the building and have already shown it to a few parties, both public and private. While we understandably need to limit public access to the building at this time, please let me know after the meeting if you are interested in a hard hat tour, and that can be arranged. In conclusion, I watched the council's finance committee meeting during which the deferral of loan payments were discussed for downtown businesses. One topic of discussion during that meeting was how can the city support all downtown businesses. I would respectfully suggest to you that you can help all downtown businesses by being supportive of this project. And by that, I don't mean financial support, I mean manage us up. Because if this project is successful, it means that the street will reopen at least a month earlier than it would otherwise. That's significant. It means we won't have a huge gap in our historic streetscape. It means a building that is generating foot traffic and contributing economic vitality to the downtown. Sure, reopening the street as soon as possible doesn't make our downtown businesses whole, but it does mitigate the impact to some extent, just like deferring loan payments mitigates it to some extent. By taking on this project, THPA assumed the risks and put the situation on a much more positive track so that the matter wouldn't continue to be tied up in court forever, all while the street remained closed. The city's West Main Street updates could be more supportive in the future than the last one was. The litigation phase of this is over. We understand that the city has a responsibility if deadlines aren't met, and we would appreciate your good faith, your collaboration, and your support in the meantime. If you have any misgivings or any concerns about the project, let's talk about them. Otherwise, this is an opportunity for our community to show what's capable of when everyone comes together. Thank you. Are there any questions I can answer?
If I may, Mr. President.
Sure.
Mr. Sutherland, I do not mean to create any negativity whatsoever, but this question, it has been presented to me by outside folks. Mm-hmm. Was money, a lack of money, the reason that this did not occur 2.5 years ago? That you were not able to purchase the building because you didn't have the cash or something like that? My question, I guess it boils down to, why wasn't this done 2.5 years ago?
We didn't have the option to purchase the building 2.5 years ago.
You didn't have the wherewithal, and there was no conversation available to kick that forward?
2.5 years ago, are you talking like around the time demolition was originally approved?
Just call it a general 2 years, 3 years, whatever that time frame is.
Yeah. I know.
Was purchase ever in the conversation with THPA and that sort of thing?
All I'd say is, while it wasn't THPA, other people offered full price more recently than that and were not able to purchase the building. So I don't know what changed there. We had the wherewithal to purchase it recently, and so we're focused on going forward. We can all go back to what could have, should have happened 2 or 3 years ago, and I think everybody around this room probably should do some soul searching on that. But, we're focused on going forward.
Well, I think we all are at this point. I think we're all supportive of the project having some type of successful end. So,
sure, right.
Whatever it is. I got no dog in the fight type thing. If you're successful,
thank you. Manage us up, Mr. Phelps. We appreciate it. Yeah.
Mr. Sievert?
To that, I guess the last point, you mentioned fundraising. Is that through a Facebook post, or what is the best way for someone wanted to contribute? How would that work?
There's a couple different ways, and first of all, so we are doing pledges at the moment, and we will actually start collecting those in a couple weeks. So pledges can be emailed to us at thpa.troy@gmail.com, or you can visit our website at www.thpa.troy. www.thpatroy.org. I always have to think about both of those to keep them straight, but there are two different ways people can get in touch with us.
And then they just would pledge, and then
They
you'll
pledge,
collect.
and then the funding will, the funds will go into an account set up at the Troy Foundation. We're partnering with them. Any other questions? All right, we'll
Thank you,
keep you
Mr.
updated.
Thank you.
Thanks, Spencer.
Anyone else? Seeing none, we are done.